The Monte Cristo Homestead loomed at the edge of the hill like a beast waiting to pounce, its shadow casting long and twisted arms over the overgrown fields. It wasn't the kind of place you'd ever expect to see in daylight. No, this house was built for the night, for the moments when darkness wraps itself around the world and turns everything into a whisper of what it once was. The old stone walls had held on to more than just memories. There was something living in the cracks, something that watched. They told me about the history when I signed up to be the caretaker. The deaths, the madness, how the place had driven every previous tenant to leave screaming, their sanity left in tatters on the doorstep. But I didn't care. The money was good, and I wasn't the kind of person to believe in ghost stories. I wasn't. That is, until I spent my first night in the Monte Cristo Homestead. The wind howled like a pack of wolves as I arrived. I swear the house was breathing, each gust of wind causing the boards to creak, the windows to rattle in their frames as if something inside was straining to get out. It was almost as if the house was groaning, a deep and ancient sound that came from deep within its bones. Still, I told myself it was just the weather. Once inside, the atmosphere grew heavier, like stepping into a room where the air had turned thick with secrets and blood. The grand staircase curled upward, draped in shadow, leading into the unknown. Dust coated every surface and cobwebs hung like forgotten curtains. The silence was oppressive, thick, and almost tangible. Each footstep I took seemed to echo far too loudly in the vast emptiness. I wasn't alone here. That much I knew almost immediately. That night, after a long day of cleaning and sorting, I made my way to the small caretaker's room in the far corner of the house, a cramped, cold space with a single bed that creaked under my weight. Exhaustion settled over me like a blanket, but sleep wouldn't come easily. The wind outside had died down, but now it was the silence that unnerved me. There was a weight to it, as if the house itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it. A knock. Faint at first, like someone tapping on a window. I ignored it. Probably just the old wood settling, I told myself. But it came again. Louder. Closer. My breath hitched as I sat up in bed, the hairs on my arms prickling with a sense of unease that clawed at my chest. It wasn't the wind. I knew that now. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the house. I grabbed the flashlight from the bedside table, the beam slicing through the darkness. The hallway outside my door was empty, the shadows long and still. But the knock came again, this time from upstairs, where the bedrooms lay abandoned and untouched for decades. I don't know what possessed me to follow the sound, but my legs carried me toward the stairs before my brain could protest. Each step up the staircase felt like a descent into madness. The air grew colder, biting at my skin like a warning. I could smell it now. A faint, sickly sweet odor, like something left to rot in a forgotten corner. The knocking grew more insistent, turning into a pounding, as if someone was trapped behind a wall and begging to be let out. When I reached the landing, the smell hit me full force. It was the stench of death, clinging to the walls like a curse. My flashlight flickered as I moved toward the door at the end of the hall. The pounding had stopped, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. My fingers hesitated on the doorknob, cold and slick with sweat. I should have turned back then. I should have walked away and left the house to its restless dead. But I didn't. I opened the door. The room beyond was empty. A child's bedroom, from the look of it, frozen in time. A small bed in the corner, covered in a faded quilt. A rocking chair by the window, gently swaying back and forth, though there was no breeze to move it. And in the corner, I saw her, a small girl, no more than 6 or 7, standing in the shadows, her face turned toward the wall. Her hair was matted, her dress tattered and stained with something dark. I couldn't see her face, and for that, I was grateful. My heart thundered in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze from her tiny, trembling figure. "Are you all right?" My voice was a whisper, swallowed by the thick air around me. She didn't move, didn't respond. And then, without warning, the rocking chair slammed against the wall with a deafening crash. The sound jolted me back into my body, and I stumbled backward, my flashlight slipping from my hand and plunging the room into darkness. I scrambled to retrieve it, my fingers shaking as I fumbled with the switch. When the light flickered back on, the room was empty. The girl was gone. I don't remember how I made it back to my room that night. My mind was a haze of terror, my body drenched in cold sweat. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. The knocking didn't come again that night, but as I drifted into a restless sleep, I could hear the faintest sound, the sound of tiny footsteps pacing just outside my door, and the whispered promise that this was only the beginning. The following night, I woke up to a sound that made my skin crawl, a slow creaking, like the hinges of a door being pried open. My body was heavy with the kind of exhaustion that comes from pure fear, the kind that sinks deep into your bones and makes it impossible to move. I blinked at the ceiling, my breath caught in my throat as I listened. The sound was coming from the hallway outside my room again. Footsteps, unmistakable now, light, deliberate. I told myself it couldn't be real. It had to be my mind playing tricks. But the Monte Cristo Homestead wasn't just a house. It was a predator, and it had me in its grip. This time, the footsteps didn't stop at the door. I heard them trail further down the hall, fading toward the far end of the house, toward the staircase that led up to the attic. I had no business going after them. No sane person would. But whatever haunted this place seemed to draw me deeper with every creak, every whisper. I grabbed the flashlight again, its beam barely piercing through the oppressive darkness, and I followed. The house felt different tonight. The cold, the smell of decay. It was worse, more intense, like the place had finally decided to drop its mask. As I made my way down the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept turning, expecting to see something slithering out from the shadows behind me. But each time I found nothing but the emptiness that suffocated the house. I reached the base of the attic stairs. They were steep, narrow, and worn with age, the wood groaning beneath my weight as I ascended. The air grew thick with dust, making each breath feel like it was scraping the back of my throat. Halfway up, I stopped. The flashlight flickered again, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls, and I heard a soft giggle. It wasn't a child's giggle. It was something worse, high-pitched, strained, as if someone was mocking me from the other side of a nightmare. I froze. The light flickered out completely, plunging me into total darkness. I heard something move in the attic above me, something heavy. With trembling hands, I banged the flashlight against my leg, desperate to get it working again. When the light finally returned, my heart nearly stopped. Standing at the top of the stairs was the girl, the same one from the night before. She was closer now, no longer hiding in the shadows, her head tilted slightly as if studying me. This time, her face wasn't turned away, and I wish to God it had been. Her eyes were gone. Where they should have been, there were only dark, hollow sockets, oozing something thick and black that dripped down her cheeks. Her mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile, teeth cracked and stained. The sight of her made my stomach turn, and yet, I couldn't look away. She raised a hand, bony and pale, pointing to something behind me. I spun, the flashlight beam sweeping across the darkness, catching nothing but dust motes and cobwebs. The attic was empty, or at least, that's what it wanted me to think. The cold air shifted around me, and a low growl filled the space. It wasn't human, it was deeper, primal, like something that belonged to the earth itself. I swung the light back to where the girl had been standing, but she was gone. In her place, the attic door was wide open, a black maw leading into a place I had no desire to go. But the growl was closer now, right behind me. I spun around just in time to catch a glimpse of movement, a flash of something inhuman, crawling toward me on all fours, too fast, too unnatural. The flashlight flickered again, and in that brief moment of light, I saw its face, or what was left of it. Flesh hung loosely from its skull, patches of hair clinging to the bone, eyes glowing with a sickening, unnatural light. It moved like a predator, each step deliberate, as though it was savoring the chase. I ran. There was no other choice. I barreled down the stairs, my feet barely touching the ground, the sound of that thing following close behind. The growl echoed in my ears, growing louder, more desperate, as if it was starving and I was the feast it had been waiting for. When I reached the main floor, I slammed the door to the attic behind me, locking it with trembling hands. My breath came in ragged gasps, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. For a moment, everything went silent. I leaned against the door, trying to calm the panic that clawed at my chest. But the silence didn't last long. A soft knock came from the other side of the door. Just once. Then again, louder, more insistent. And then it was pounding so hard that the entire door rattled in its frame. I stumbled back, watching as the wood began to splinter under the pressure, as if something was forcing its way through. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the pounding stopped. Silence again. My flashlight flickered one final time before dying completely, plunging the room into a thick, oppressive darkness. I stood there, heart racing, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. No footsteps, no growls. Just the weight of the house pressing down on me, reminding me that this wasn't over. And as I turned to head back to my room, I felt a breath on the back of my neck. Cold, Foul, like something long dead had just exhaled its last breath against my skin. It whispered a single word. Low, guttural. Run! But I couldn't. I was already too late. By the time morning finally arrived, I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every creak, every whisper of wind through the walls seemed alive, watching, waiting. There was no comfort in daylight here. The Monte Cristo Homestead didn't care about the sun. Whatever darkness lived inside these walls, it thrived regardless. But as soon as I saw the weak rays of sunlight pushing through the cracked windows, I decided I needed answers. I spent most of the day avoiding the attic. I couldn't bring myself to go back up there. Instead, I searched the house, hoping for something, anything that would explain what had been happening. The caretaker before me had left in a hurry, I'd been told. No one knew where he went or why. Now I had a suspicion that he hadn't gone anywhere willingly. The place was an absolute maze. Every room had its own story. Every hallway seemed to twist and bend in ways that made no sense. It was as if the house itself was alive, shifting, breathing, waiting to trap you when you least expected it. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and as I wandered, I noticed strange things. Cold spots like pockets of air that had been sucked dry of life. The faint smell of rot that seemed to follow me no matter where I went. And sometimes, just sometimes, I heard it again. That faint, high-pitched giggle, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was early evening when I found it. The small door hidden behind a heavy bookcase in the back room, almost like it had been deliberately concealed. The air was thick with dust, the musty smell nearly unbearable. With a hard shove, the bookcase slid aside, revealing a narrow passage. My heart was racing again, a familiar sense of dread crawling up my spine as I reached for the door handle. It creaked open with a sound that sent chills down my arms. Inside was a small, dimly lit room, barely more than a closet. The walls were lined with old photographs, black and white, their edges curling with age. Each one depicted the homestead in various states, from its early days as a grand estate to the dilapidated ruin it had become. But it was the faces in the photos that made my blood run cold. The children. There were so many of them. Boys and girls, all with the same hollow eyes, the same twisted smiles, and standing among them, in the center of the group in every photo, was the girl, the one I had seen upstairs. Her face was just as I remembered it, sunken, with those dark, empty sockets staring out from the photo as if they could see straight through me. I stepped back, bile rising in my throat. That's when I saw it, a diary, resting on a small table by the far wall. I grabbed it, flipping it open with shaking hands. The handwriting was erratic, almost frantic, and as I read, the horrifying truth began to unfold. The previous caretaker hadn't just disappeared. He had been lured in, just like me. The house had taken him, and before him, there had been others. Dozens of others, each one drawn in by the promise of a quiet job, only to become prey for whatever haunted this place. The diary described strange rituals, sacrifices made in the dead of night, and always, the children. They were the key. They were the house's victims. The words blurred as panic overtook me. I slammed the book shut, my mind racing. I had to leave. Now. I couldn't stay here another night. But as I turned to make my way back through the house, I heard it again. The knock. Soft, but unmistakable. It came from the hallway outside the room. No, not again. I backed away from the door, gripping the diary so tightly my knuckles turned white. The knock came again, louder this time. Then came the footsteps, slow and deliberate, just like before. Something was outside, pacing back and forth, waiting for me to make a move. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed my back against the wall, hoping it wouldn't come any closer. But then, the door creaked open. I froze. The girl stood in the doorway, her eyeless face twisted into that same grotesque smile. She stepped inside, her feet barely making a sound against the wooden floor. And then, from behind her, something else followed. It crawled into the room, dragging its broken body across the floor, a gurgling growl escaping from its throat. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, patches of flesh hanging loosely, revealing the jagged bone beneath. It moved in fits and starts, its head jerking unnaturally from side to side as it approached. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was trapped between the wall and the thing that was now slithering toward me. The girl's head tilted again, her smile growing wider as she watched my horror unfold. And then, just as the creature reached me, she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost sweet, like a lullaby. "Don't worry," she whispered. "You'll be one of us soon." The thing lunged, its gnarled hands reaching for my legs, its fingers like claws digging into my skin. Pain shot up through my body as it pulled me down, dragging me toward the darkness of the hallway, I kicked, screamed, thrashed, anything to get away, but its grip was like iron, cold and unrelenting. And then, just as I felt myself slipping into the abyss, something shifted. The grip loosened for just a moment, enough for me to pull free. I scrambled to my feet, blood dripping from the gashes in my legs, and ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, through the twisting hallways, down the stairs, toward the front door. But when I reached the entryway, the door was gone. Just a solid wall where the exit should have been. Behind me, I heard them. The girl, the thing. They were coming for me. And then the voice whispered again, low and guttural. "You can't leave, not now." I turned just in time to see the girl standing at the foot of the stairs, her smile wider than ever. And behind her, the thing crawling closer, dragging itself toward me. I was trapped, and the house had no intention of letting me go. I pressed myself against the wall where the door should have been, my heart hammering in my chest as the girl and that thing came closer. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in sync with the horror unfolding before me. I had no way out. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The girl's smile twisted into something grotesque. Her eyeless sockets locked on me as she whispered, "It's time." Her hand stretched out, the skin peeling back, revealing bone underneath. The thing behind her growled, a low, wet sound that sent a chill through my spine. I felt the cold grip of despair closing in. But then, something changed. The air around me grew warm, a sharp contrast to the icy presence that had haunted me for days. It started as a soft hum, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder, a gentle vibration that seemed to push back against the darkness. I looked down at my hand and realized I was still holding the diary. The pages seemed to glow faintly, pulsing with a soft light. I flipped it open, and as my eyes scanned the frantic writing, something stood out. It wasn't just a diary. It was a ledger, a record of everyone who had been claimed by the house. But there was more. Scrawled in the margins, barely legible, were words I hadn't noticed before. A way out. My heart raced as I frantically read through the lines. The house didn't just feed on fear and despair. It thrived on isolation, on convincing its victims they had no hope. But if I could face what it had shown me, if I could stand firm against the terror, the house would lose its hold. The girl was nearly upon me now, her bony fingers reaching for my throat, but something inside me snapped. I slammed the diary shut, the light within it intensifying, filling the room with a golden glow that seemed to burn away the shadows. The girl recoiled, her twisted smile faltering as the warmth filled the air. "Not today," I said, my voice trembling but firm. The thing behind her let out a furious screech, its body thrashing as if trying to fight against the light. The house itself seemed to groan, the walls shuddering, as though it was in pain. I took a step forward, gripping the diary tightly, the warmth from its pages spreading through me like fire. For the first time since I'd entered the Monte Cristo Homestead, I felt something. Hope. "You don't control me," I whispered, my voice gaining strength. "You never did." The girl's smile collapsed entirely, and she took a step back, her form flickering like a candle struggling against the wind. The thing that had once been so menacing began to shrink, its twisted features crumbling under the weight of the light that now flooded the room. The warmth grew stronger, filling me with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in days. The diary in my hands glowed brighter, almost blinding, and with a final burst of light, the girl and the creature behind her vanished, dissolving into nothing. The oppressive weight that had suffocated the house lifted, and the cold, dead air transformed into something alive, something vibrant. I stumbled back, dazed, as the front door, now whole and real, materialized where the wall had been. The light from the diary flickered once, and then faded, its job complete. For a moment I just stood there, trying to catch my breath. The silence around me wasn't the suffocating, malicious kind I had grown used to. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that fills a home after a long storm has finally passed. I walked to the door, my legs trembling with exhaustion. When I pulled it open, warm sunlight streamed in, bathing me in a golden glow that chased away the last remnants of fear. The fields outside were overgrown and wild, but they looked different now, less menacing, more like a forgotten garden finally waking up from a long, dark sleep. I stepped outside, the soft breeze brushing against my skin, and turned to look back at the house one last time. The Monte Cristo Homestead, with its cracked stone walls and ancient rotting wood, was still there, but it no longer felt like a living thing. No longer felt like it was watching me, waiting for me to stumble. Whatever evil had lived within its walls was gone, banished. The diary in my hand felt lighter, its purpose fulfilled. I could feel the souls of those who had been trapped here, freed at last. As I walked down the long, winding path leading away from the house, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It was over. I had survived, and for the first time in days, I smiled. The Monte Cristo Homestead was behind me, and as I made my way back toward the world I had almost lost, I knew I would never return. Whatever horrors had lived there, they were gone now, replaced by something far more powerful: peace. As I walked, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest echo of voices, soft, like a lullaby. Thank you. I closed my eyes, breathing in the warm air, and kept walking. The house, the terror, the darkness, they were all behind me now, and I was free.